Okay. The corporotocracy is this group of individuals, men mostly, few women, who run our biggest corporations. And they really act as the emperor of this empire. They control our media, either through direct ownership or advertising. They control most of our politicians because they finance their campaigns, either through their corporations or through personal contributions that come out of the corporations. And they're not elected. They don't serve a limited term. They don't report to anybody. They really very, very much are running things. And they work under the premise that they should maximize profits regardless of the environmental and social costs.
Would you mention that governments and corporations and how the private enterprise is essentially...
Right.
And actually, coupled with that, could you mention how the government essentially is invisible when it comes to the actions of the corporotocracy?
Right.
They put the front group of the unregulated private corporations.
Yeah, at the very...
One second. So maybe make one small adjustment. Okay, go ahead.
At the very top of the corporotocracy, you really can't tell whether a person's working for a private corporation or the government because they're always moving back and forth. So, you've got a guy who one moment is the president of a big construction company like Halliburton, and the next moment he's vice president of the United States, or the president who was in the oil business. And this is true whether you've got Democrats or Republicans in the office. You have the moving back and forth through the revolving door. So you really can't distinguish. And in a way, our government is invisible a lot of the time, and its policies are carried out by our corporations on one level or another. And then again, the policies of the government are basically forged by the corporotocracy and then presented to the government. They become government policy. So it's an incredibly cozy relationship and a very dangerous relationship. I think that's part of what, as we move forward and we move out of this empire and we look for solutions, how do we create a better world for our children and grandchildren? One of the most important things is to break that bond there and to make people responsible more to just creating a decent world, creating an environmentally sustainable, socially just and peaceful world. It's interesting because the big corporations depend so much on the banking system, the whole financial system, the whole Wall Street system, and the banks. On the other hand, the banks depend on the corporations to make their money. So with the money that they have, they've got to invest it someplace, so they've got to invest it primarily in corporations. And so there's this symbiotic relationship between them that exists. You couldn't have the huge corporate structures that we have without the banking structure that we have, and you couldn't have the banking structure that we have without the corporate structure that we have. And once again, it's that corporotocracy. And you've got the people moving back and forth between these things, working with each other. So the big corporations almost always have financial people on their boards, and the big financial institutions almost always have corporate people on their boards. And there's this interweaving and intermeshing at the very, very top. And then all of them, at one point or another, probably work for the government or with the government. And the government people come into the banking system or the corporate system when they retire from government. And then maybe they go back again at some point in time. So it's a very insidious and I'd have to say a corrupt system. A system that just feeds into the hands of what we call the corporotocracy, and to a large degree works against everybody else in the world. Well, we economic hitmen really have been the ones responsible for creating this first truly global empire, and we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things that benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but really don't help the majority of the people at all who are too poor to use much electricity or the ports or don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks. However, those people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt. It's such a big debt they can't repay it, and that's part of the plan, that they can't repay it. And so at some point we economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debts, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote. And in that way, we've really created an empire, but we've done it very, very subtly. It's clandestine. So all the empires of the past were built on the military, and everybody knew they were building them. So the British knew they were building them, the French, the Germans, the Romans, the Greeks, and they were proud of it. And they always had some excuse, like spreading civilization, spreading some religion, something like that. But they knew they were doing it. We don't. The majority of the people in the United States have no idea that we're living off the benefits of a clandestine empire. That today there's as much slavery in the world, more slavery in the world than ever before. That our shirts, our shoes, everything we own is made under the guise of this empire, and that there's a tremendous amount of people around the planet suffering as a result of this. We are less than 5% of the world's population living in the United States. We're consuming more than 25% of the world's resources. That's a tragedy.
Or Noriega, we got that one. So, Arbenz. What happened with Arbenz?
When Arbenz became president of Guatemala, the country was very much under the thumbs of United Fruit Company, the big international corporations. And Arbenz ran on this ticket that said, we want to get the land back to the people. And once he took power, he was implementing policies that would do exactly that, give land rights back to the people. United Fruit didn't like that very much. And so they hired a public relations firm, launched a huge campaign in the United States to convince the United States people, the citizens of the United States, and the press of the United States, and the Congress of the United States, that Arbenz was a Soviet puppet, and that if we allowed him to stay in power, the Soviets would have a foothold in this hemisphere. And that at that point in time was a huge fear on everybody's mind. We all the Red Terror, the Communist terror. And so, to make a long story short, out of this public relations campaign came a commitment on the part of the CIA and the military to take this man out. And in fact, we did. We sent in planes, we sent in soldiers, we sent in jackals, we sent everything in to take him out, and did take him out. And as soon as he was removed from office, the new guy that took over after him basically reinstated everything to the big international corporations, including United Fruit.
So, move on to Roldos. What happened?
Ecuador, for many, many years, had been ruled by pro-U.S. dictators, often relatively brutal. They often claimed to be democratic, but they weren't. They were dictators. And then it was decided that they were going to have a truly democratic election. Jaime Roldos ran for office. He was a young, dynamic lawyer, and his main goal, he said, as president, would be to help Ecuador use its resources, particularly its oil, to pull its poor people up by their own bootstraps, to make sure that Ecuador's resources were used to help the people. And he won, overwhelming, by more votes than anybody had ever won anything in Ecuador. And again, first democratically elected president after many years of essentially dictators. And he began to implement these policies to, in fact, do that, to make sure that the oil companies were taxed, or if not, to be nationalized, to make sure that the profits from oil went to help the people. Well, we didn't like that in the United States. I was sent down as one of several economic hitmen, and in that particular job I wasn't the primary one. I was sent in from Panama to help some of the other ones to change Roldos, to corrupt him, to bring him around, to let him know, okay, you can get very rich, you and your family, if you play our game, but if you continue to try to keep these policies you've promised, you're going to go. He wouldn't listen. He knew that his life was in severe danger. I've become good friends with his daughter in recent years. She's now in her 40s and a member of the Congress in Quito, in Ecuador. And she said her dad was very aware that he was taking huge risks, but he took them anyway, and he was assassinated.
And the means of assassination was?
Officially his airplane crashed. He and his wife were on board, and several other men and women, and the defense minister and his wife. And the pilot of that plane, according to Marta Roldos, Jaime's daughter, was a very good family friend, wouldn't have done anything foolish. She says that the official reports, which claim that the weather was very bad and they hit a high mountain, are erroneous. The weather wasn't that bad where they were by the standards of Ecuador. It was raining. It rains a lot in the coastal plain, and they weren't even in the high mountains. They were coming up in the coastal area, according to Marta. Also, what we do know is that as soon as the plane crashed, the whole area was cordoned off. And nobody was allowed in. Even the local police, the Ecuadorian police, were not allowed in. The only people allowed in were U.S. military from a nearby base and some of the Ecuadorian military that worked closely with the Ecuadorian military. When an investigation was launched, two of the key witnesses died in car accidents before they had a chance to testify. A lot of very, very strange things that went on around the assassination of Jaime Roldos. I, like most people who've really looked at this case, had absolutely no doubt that it was an assassination. And of course, in my position as an economic hitman, I was always expecting something to happen to Jaime, whether it be a coup or assassination, I wasn't sure, but that he would be taken down because he was not being corrupted. He would not allow himself to be corrupted the way we wanted to corrupt him.
Right.
So airplane crashes are a great way to assassinate people because the evidence is destroyed, and it's virtually impossible to prove foul play.
So let's move on to Allende. Is that the pronunciation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Allende again, president of Chile, and Allende went up against a very powerful U.S. corporation, ITT, International Telephone and Telegraph Company, and a guy named Harold Janine, who was a very powerful figure at the time. And Janine decided that Allende had to go, brought in the CIA. The CIA went in and took him out. Now, Allende was relatively easier to justify than some of the others because he was an avowed socialist, if you want to call it that, but he was doing really good things for his people. However, ITT was totally opposed to him and the policies that he was implementing there. It's an interesting case, too, because if we look today at ITT, we don't find much. There still exists, but it's a very small company, the shadow of what it used to be. And yet at one time it had been one of the most powerful companies in the world, a company that was able to bring down the presidency of Allende in Chile. And I think that again sends a tremendously strong message to us that these corporations are vulnerable and that we do have clout, we the people, because ITT is gone. Many other big corporations that move around during most of my lifetime are gone now too. You look at the airline industry. Look at Pan American, which was a very, very powerful company at one time, owned Intercontinental Hotels and many other businesses. Gone today. There's so much of that out there, of companies that have disappeared, and the people who run these companies are very, very aware of that. That gives us a lot of leverage. We, the people, can exercise power of these companies and force them to do a better job.
So Torrijos, describe in the same kind of brief capacity what happened to him, and denote the plane crash as well, so those connections.
Omar Torrijos, president of Panama, was one of my favorite people. I really, really liked him. He was very charismatic. He was a guy who really wanted to help his country. And when I tried to bribe him or corrupt him, he said, "Look, John," he called me Juanito. He said, "Look, Juanito, I don't need the money. I got a good life. I got a good house. I got a good wife. I've got whatever I want in terms of yachts." And he was a guy who really liked to have a good time. And he was having a good time. And he said, "But what I really need is for my country to be treated fairly. I need for the United States to repay the debts that you owe my people for all the destruction you've done here. I need to be in a position where I can help other Latin American countries win their independence and be free of this terrible presence from the north that you people are exploiting us so badly. I need to have the Panama Canal back in the hands of the Panamanian people. That's what I want. And so, leave me alone. Don't try to bribe me." It was 1981, and in May, Jaime Roldos was assassinated. And Omar was very aware of this. Afterwards, I heard from family members. And Marta Roldos, the daughter of Jaime Roldos, married Omar Torrijos' nephew. And the nephew told Marta, and I've heard this from a number of sources, that after that plane crash of Roldos,